Lena had always been glued to her phone, scrolling through social media and chatting with friends. But one day, she started receiving strange and unsettling messages from an unknown number. At first, Lena tried to ignore the messages, thinking they were just a prank or a wrong number. But as the messages continued, they became more and more disturbing. The messages were always from different numbers, but they all had the same tone of malice and threat. They would say things like, "I'm watching you," or "You're not as safe as you think you are." Lena tried to block the numbers, but they kept finding a way to get through. She even tried changing her phone number, but the messages continued to haunt her. As the days went on, Lena became increasingly paranoid. She started seeing shadows out of the corners of her eyes, and she would jump at the slightest sound. One night, Lena's phone buzzed with a new message. This one was different from the others. It had a picture attached to it, a picture of Lena walking down the street, taken from behind. Lena's heart raced as she realized that the person behind the messages was watching her. She tried to call the police, but they told her that they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. Lena knew that she was on her own. She started staying inside all day, locking all the doors and windows. But the messages kept coming, more frequent and more threatening than ever. Finally, Lena couldn't take it anymore. She went outside to confront whoever was behind the messages, but there was no one there. As she turned to go back inside, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Lena screamed, but it was too late. The person behind the messages had caught up to her. Lena was never seen again. The police searched for her, but they found no trace of her or her abductor. Her phone continued to receive messages, but they were never traced back to a source. The mystery of Lena's disappearance haunted her friends and family for years to come, a reminder that sometimes the darkest terrors can come from the most unexpected places. Always stay near somebody if you're going outside while in a dangerous situation, especially if you're a female. Samantha had always been a huge fan of social media influencers. She followed their every move on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and dreamed of one day becoming an influencer herself. But Samantha's admiration turned into an obsession when she discovered the profile of her favorite influencer, Katie. Samantha spent hours scrolling through Katie's pictures, liking and commenting on every post, and even sending her direct messages. At first, Katie was flattered by Samantha's attention. She responded to her messages and thanked her for her support. But Samantha's messages became increasingly frequent and disturbing, revealing a level of obsession that Katie found deeply unsettling. Katie tried to distance herself from Samantha, but the obsessed fan was not deterred. She began to stalk Katie online, leaving comments on every post and even sending her gifts and letters. One day, Katie received a message from Samantha that made her blood run cold. "I know where you live," the message read. "I'm coming for you." Katie was terrified. She blocked Samantha on all her social media accounts, but the messages continued to come through. Samantha's threats grew more and more graphic, and Katie knew that she was in real danger. One night, Katie heard a knock on her front door. She looked through the peephole and saw Samantha standing on the other side, a maniacal look in her eyes. Katie tried to run, but Samantha was too fast. She tackled Katie to the ground and began to strangle her, her fingers tightening around Katie's neck until she stopped moving. The next day, Samantha posted a picture on Instagram of herself standing over Katie's lifeless body, with the caption, "I did it for the likes." The police eventually caught Samantha and brought her to trial, but she showed no remorse for her actions. She had become so consumed by her obsession with Katie that she was willing to do anything to get her attention, even if it meant taking her life. As for Katie's family and friends, they were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, haunted by the memory of the social media influencer who was taken from them far too soon. I guess this is a result of bad surroundings, influence from the wrong people, or even maybe just bad parenting. The condition of today's generation of teens is very concerning, and social media plays a very big part in that. Megan and her friends thought it would be funny to create a fake social media profile of a boy named Tyler to prank their classmates. They spent hours crafting the perfect profile picture and writing clever posts, and they even went so far as to create fake conversations between Tyler and some of the other students. At first, the prank was a huge success. Everyone at school was talking about the mysterious new student, and Megan and her friends were thrilled with how well their plan was working. But things took a sinister turn when Tyler's messages began to take on a threatening tone. He started making demands and issuing threats to the other students, and Megan and her friends realized too late that they had gone too far. They tried to delete the fake profile, but it was too late. Tyler had become something more than just a prank, and the profile had taken on a life of its own. The messages continued to pour in, and the threats became more and more violent. One day, Megan and her friends received a message from Tyler that made their blood run cold. "I know what you did," the message read. "And now it's time for you to pay." They tried to tell the other students that Tyler was just a prank, but no one believed them. The messages continued to pour in, and Megan and her friends soon found themselves the target of a social media mob. They were bombarded with hate messages and threats, and their lives became a living hell. They tried to shut down the fake profile, but it was too late. Tyler had become something more than just a prank, and there was no stopping him now. One night, Megan and her friends received a message from Tyler that sent chills down their spines. "I'm coming for you," the message read. "And there's nothing you can do to stop me." The next day, Megan and her friends were found dead in their homes, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. The police investigated, but they were never able to find out who was behind the fake Tyler profile or the horrific murders. He was probably a hacker and very good at staying anonymous. The students at the school whispered about the curse of Tyler, a vengeful spirit who had been unleashed by Megan and her friends. And no one ever dared to create a fake social media profile again, for fear of what might happen if Tyler returned. This is the best example of prank gone too far. A woman named Marissa was thrilled when she received a message from a handsome stranger on her social media account. They started chatting, and she quickly realized they had a lot in common. He was charming and attentive, and before long, they had arranged to meet in person. She met him at a cozy cafe, and they hit it off immediately. He was even more attractive in person, and his smooth talking left her feeling giddy and lightheaded. But as the night wore on, Marissa began to notice something off about him. He seemed to know things about her that she hadn't shared with him yet, and his questions became more invasive and personal. When she asked him how he knew so much about her, he simply smiled and said, "I do my research." Marissa felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to leave, but he wouldn't let her go. He insisted they go back to his place, and despite her better judgment, she followed him. The moment they stepped inside his apartment, Marissa knew she had made a mistake. The walls were covered in photos of her, taken without her knowledge. He had been stalking her for weeks, maybe even months. She tried to run, but he was too quick for her. He caught her and tied her up, keeping her as his prisoner for days. He would talk to her for hours on end, telling her how much he loved her and how they were meant to be together. But Marissa knew better. She knew he was sick and twisted, and she would never be safe in his hands. She managed to break free and ran for the door, but it was too late. He caught her and dragged her back into his apartment, determined to make her his forever. The last thing Marissa saw was his cold, dead eyes as he snuffed out her life. The police found Marissa's body days later, along with countless other victims who had fallen prey to the handsome stranger's charms. And as they searched for the killer, they realized that the charming man was actually a deranged serial killer, preying on vulnerable women through social media. Always be careful with who you're chatting and meeting up with, especially if it's a stranger that you just met. Or at least bring a pepper spray with you. Max was a successful businessman, and he had a lot of personal and professional connections on his social media account. He used it to stay in touch with friends, network with colleagues, and keep up with industry news. So when he found out that his account had been hacked, he was understandably upset. He first noticed something was wrong when he tried to log into his account and found that his password wasn't working. At first, he thought he had just forgotten it, so he tried a few more times. But after several failed attempts, he realized that something was off. He contacted the social media platform's customer support, and they informed him that his account had been compromised. They advised him to change his password and update his security settings, which he did. But it was already too late. Over the next few days, Max started receiving strange notifications and messages on his account. Some were spam messages, but others were more alarming. He received notifications about purchases he hadn't made, bank transfers he didn't authorize, and even a fake passport under his name. It was clear that his personal information had been stolen and was being used to commit fraud. Max was panicked. He immediately contacted his bank and credit card companies to freeze his accounts, but it was too late. The hacker had already made multiple fraudulent transactions using his information. Things only got worse from there. Max started receiving threatening messages from unknown numbers. They would send him messages like, "We know where you live," and "You can't hide from us." He was terrified and didn't know who to turn to. Then one day, he came home to find that his house had been broken into. The thief had taken all of his valuables, including his laptop and phone. It was clear that the hacker had escalated from using his information to commit fraud to breaking into his home. Max felt violated and helpless. He didn't know who was behind the hacking, or what they were planning to do with his information. He contacted the police, but they were slow to respond, and the damage had already been done. The situation escalated quickly. Max's life became a living nightmare, with constant fear and paranoia. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his closest friends and colleagues. The hacker seemed to know everything about him, and he didn't know how to protect himself. The hacker continued to torment Max for months, using his personal information to commit more crimes and send more threatening messages. The police were investigating, but they couldn't seem to find any leads. Max was left to fend for himself, constantly looking over his shoulder and fearing for his life. In the end, the hacker was never caught, and Max's life was ruined. He was forced to move to a new city and start over, but the trauma of the experience never left him. He became a recluse, avoiding social media and any online activity altogether. The hacker had taken everything from him, and there was no way to get it back. The Johnson family was excited to move into their new home, a beautiful two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. They had been searching for months for the perfect place to raise their two young children, and they were thrilled to finally find a house that met all their needs. As they settled in and started to make the house their own, they began to notice some strange things. The previous owner had left behind a few things that seemed out of place, like a stack of old newspapers and some strange trinkets in the basement. One day, while scrolling through social media, Mrs. Johnson stumbled upon the previous owner's profile. As she looked through the pictures and posts, she started to feel uneasy. There were a lot of posts about a missing girl from the neighborhood, and the previous owner seemed to be very invested in the case. The more Mrs. Johnson looked, the more disturbed she became. She found posts about the girl's daily routine and pictures of her playing in her backyard. She even found a post where the previous owner claimed to have seen the girl walking down the street the night before she disappeared. Mrs. Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She decided to do some digging and found out that the previous owner had been questioned by the police about the girl's disappearance but was never charged with anything. The Johnson family became obsessed with the case and started to investigate on their own. They talked to neighbors and searched the woods behind the house, but they never found any clues. As the weeks went by, the family started to notice more strange things about the house. They would hear strange noises at night and occasionally see strange shadows moving in the corner of their eyes. They started to feel like they were being watched. One night, while the family was sitting in the living room, they heard a loud noise coming from upstairs. Mr. Johnson went to investigate but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, when he went back downstairs, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, on the living room wall, was a message written in what looked like blood. It read, "I'm still here." The family was terrified and decided to leave the house immediately. As they were packing up their belongings, they found a hidden room in the basement. Inside, they found evidence that the previous owner had been stalking the missing girl for months before she disappeared. The family was horrified and reported their findings to the police. The investigation that followed uncovered a dark and twisted web of secrets that the previous owner had been keeping hidden for years. The Johnson family was lucky to have escaped the house unharmed, but they never forgot the horrors they had uncovered. They moved far away from the house and tried to put the experience behind them, but the memory of the missing girl and the previous owner's disturbing social media presence would haunt them forever. This is why you should always pay attention to every detail and ask questions before you move into the house. That was it for this video. See you next time.